Every once in a while, you stumble across a game so good it feels like a personal secret you're not supposed to share, but that's not what we're doing here. And since we've spent a lot of time gaming, we feel like we have to highlight some of the best experiences that you should know about. Some of these games have already been featured here, but in case you haven't played them yet, now is the sign that you should give them a try. Hi folks, welcome to Crypto Mac, and today we have 10 incredible games hiding in plain sight.
Don't I know you, sir?
Don't believe so. I haven't been here in many years. Name's Silas Greaves.
Silas Greaves? The bounty hunter?
Used to be.
Okay, so first up, we have Call of Juarez Gunslinger, and I really want to emphasize that while the earlier games in this franchise were pretty mediocre, this specific title is an absolute blast, Honestly, mentioning this one shouldn't be taken as a recommendation for the rest of the series, but for some reason, Gunslinger just works perfectly as a high-octane Western experience. It is a wonderfully straightforward shooter available on pretty much every platform like PC, Switch, and consoles, and it actually manages to deliver a narrative that feels right at home in the genre. I mean, the story isn't doing anything wildly experimental, but they nail the tone so effectively that you feel like a genuine part of that gritty world. That said, the real star of the show is the gameplay because the action is incredibly flashy and the pacing keeps you on your toes from start to finish. It controls remarkably well, and there are these fantastic moments where the story is actually being told around you while some really cool music kicks in to set the mood. This game honestly has a level of swagger that the previous games on the series completely lacked, and frankly, a lot of other Western shooters today just can't match that vibe. So when you get into those big set-piece shootouts, it almost feels like playing a Call of Duty campaign, but with a cowboy hat and a crisp lever-action rifle in your hands. Every era-appropriate weapon feels heavy and satisfying, and when you pair that with the top-tier sound design, it really gets your heart pumping at a rapid pace. And all those little story beats and atmospheric touches come together to make every shootout feel incredibly intense, right? Ultimately, it's just a pure, unadulterated action game that doesn't overthink things, which is exactly why it stands out as such a polished gem today. Now next up, we've got I Am Your Beast, and if you've ever found yourself obsessed with the action in Hotline Miami, you really need to have this one on your radar. It's one of the latest action title from the developers over at Strange Scaffold, and I mean, it's easily one of the best games to drop a few years ago, mostly because it perfectly nails that first-person ultra-hardcore energy where every single encounter feels like a high-stakes life-or-death moment. You're moving through these levels where you can die in a heartbeat, so you really have to make every tool in your arsenal count. And yeah, that includes using your bare fist to dispatch enemies, which, I mean, what's not to love about that, right? And, each stage essentially plays out like a super violent, high-speed combo-building puzzle that's designed to be short, but incredibly replayable. But what really pushes the game over the top for me is how the story keeps the momentum moving without ever slowing down the adrenaline-fueled action. Instead of just reading through text-based dialogue, you're getting these intense, fully voiced radio transmissions that honestly give the whole thing this gritty, hard-boiled cinematic feel. So rather than being a distraction, the narrative actually feels like a reward that builds on the tension of each mission as you go. It's one of those rare cases where the plot actually matches the frantic energy of the mechanics perfectly. Those are the kinds of details that make a hidden gem really stand out among the bigger titles today. And coming in next, we have Bright Memory Infinite, which, one of those games that makes you question what's even possible for a single developer. I mean, you've got to appreciate the fact that this entire project was spearheaded by just one guy who basically poured his soul into it through his studio. And you might argue that since he has a studio name, it technically counts as a company, but when you look at the heavy lifting, it's really just this one person with a totally nuts vision. What's even more inspiring is that he actually built the foundation for this game in his free time, which just goes to show how much passion can override a lack of massive resources. And the end result is something that looks and plays with an almost AAA level of polish, even though you can still feel that raw, high-octane energy that usually comes from smaller indie experiments. So you're playing as Shelia, an agent tasked with stopping some shadowy terrorist organization from grabbing a mysterious power source, but the plot is really just a backdrop for the absolute chaos. Honestly, Who cares about the lore when you have access to these incredibly slick guns and a sword that lets you slice through enemies like butter? So the gameplay really becomes the star of the show. It definitely carries that slightly unrefined Unity Store asset vibe in some places, but that's completely overshadowed by the balls-to-the-wall action that never seems to let up. The whole experience feels like taking sci-fi and cyberpunk elements and just cranking them up to the absolute next level, which is exactly why I find it so captivating to play. That said, even if the story is a bit of a blur, the sheer creativity and technical skill on display here are enough to make anyone stop and pay attention. It's a relentless, beautiful mess of a shooter that proves you don't need a 1,000-person team to create something that looks this stunning, right? You have to love how it manages to blend those high-speed mechanics with visuals that would make some major studios jealous. It really is a testament to what one person can do when they just decide to go for it and build something they actually want to play. So if you're looking for high-speed combat that doesn't hold back, this is definitely one you shouldn't sleep on. Coming in next, we have Mullet Mad Jack. And I know you're going to notice that most of the games on this list are like shooters, specifically those classic-style boomer shooters, as everyone calls them now. I mean, the reason for that is pretty simple. These indie titles have just been outperforming almost every modern AAA shooter lately, and while I'm not trying to totally dump on the big budget category, it's just really hard to argue with the pure fun factor these indie studios are churning out. Mullet Mad Jack is a perfect example of that because the gunplay is absolutely top-notch, which is impressive for a game where you spend so much time just punching people in the teeth. It's basically like a Doom-inspired fever dream mixed with an arcade combo chaser, and honestly, it's one of those things that's hard to describe accurately, so you really just have to play it to feel the flow. Once you get into that combat rhythm, you'll rarely find yourself standing still, you know? You're constantly leaping around with these wild jumps, hunting down high-energy sodas for buffs, pistol-whipping fools, and basically just going full John Wick on everything that breathes. There's also a ton of creativity and experimentation in the level design, like this weird non-sequitur hunting section that feels almost like a Bloodborne QuickTime event. I don't even know what you'd call it, really. But that said, there is a story here, but it's mostly just an excuse for over-the-top jokes and neon visuals wrapped in a storyline that makes absolutely no damn sense. But honestly, that's exactly why it works so well. Now, next on the list is Shadow Warrior 2. This one stands out as such a blast, whether you're diving in solo or grabbing a friend for some co-op action. Now, I mean, the developers over at Flying Wild Hog have had a few misses over the years, but they really found their groove here by blending over-the-top violence with a protagonist you can't help but love. You're dropped right into this wild world where humans and demons are just kind of coexisting, which creates this constant chaotic energy that keeps you on your toes. You step into the boots of Lo Wan, a mercenary who's basically the only thing standing between the world and a total global catastrophe. And what makes him so great is how he manages to be completely flippant and ridiculous while simultaneously being an absolute butcher on the battlefield. There's something so satisfying about the way the game embraces its own mindlessness because it's that lack of restraint that makes the whole experience feel so fluid and fast-paced. You aren't just shooting things though, so you have to get comfortable with a massive arsenal that ranges from high-tech firearms and traditional katanas to literal supernatural powers. Mastery of that skill set is absolute key here, honestly, because the way you chain your abilities together completely changes how you approach every encounter. It really feels like a super overlooked entry in the genre, and that said, I'd argue it's actually the peak of the entire franchise. So, if you've already messed around with the first game, or even the third one, you really owe it to yourself to circle back to this sequel and see what you missed. It's just one of those games where you can totally lose yourself in the carnage and have a genuinely good time without ever overthinking the plot. Plus, it's honestly impressive to see how much the team pushed the envelope with this one compared to where the series started. Because, you know, the sheer variety of weapons here alone is enough to keep you busy for hours. You just don't see many shooters that balance this specific level of self-aware humor and gore so perfectly in this day and age. It's definitely a must-play if you're looking for something that's as fun as it is unapologetically brutal, so you should definitely check it out. Coming in next, with the recent announcement of the sequel, Kena Scars of Cosmora, there really isn't a better time than right now to jump into Kena Bridge of Spirits and experience this world for yourself, right? So, I'll admit it's one of the most expensive game on this list, but you honestly have to look at the sheer value you're getting for that price point. I mean, even though it was developed on a much smaller budget than a typical blockbuster, it features some of the smoothest, most high-end graphics of any game we've mentioned today. Personally, I think it easily stands toe-to-toe with major AAA titles in terms of its emotional story, its tight combat mechanics, and those stunning visuals, It's a beautiful action-adventure journey where you guide Kena through a mystical realm, helping the spirits of the departed resolve their unfinished business so they can finally move on. Throughout the game, you'll be using your staff to take down enemies while constantly uncovering hidden secrets and solving intricate puzzles scattered across the landscape. You also have these incredibly cool little companions with you that add a layer of charm and strategy to the way you interact with the environment. Honestly, the gameplay feels like this brilliant mix of the modern God of War intensity and that classic, polished Nintendo charm that just makes everything feel so fluid. It looks really, really nice in motion, almost like you're playing through a high-budget animated film where every forest and ruin feels alive. And that said, if the price is right for you, this is such a solid and rewarding journey that you definitely shouldn't pass up. Coming in next, we have Bramble the Mountain King, which is honestly such a prime example of how indie horror has been totally outshining those massive AAA titles for quite a while now. Since there are so many predictable choices out there, we really wanted to think outside the box for this list, which is why this game specifically made the cut as a bit of a unique genre bender. It might not be the kind of game that's constantly trying to scare your pants off with cheap jumps, but it's an incredible adventure that's packed with these haunting, creative moments that are just deeply unsettling, Any fan of the genre really has to give this a look because it's a grim experience that digs into heavy themes like morality through the lens of dark, old-school folklore. The whole world is inspired by those twisted Nordic fairy tales, so you can expect plenty of those lingering hints of terror that stay with you long after you've finished playing. You're stepping into the shoes of a young boy named Ollie, and you're essentially forced to trek across these beautiful yet haunted landscapes on a desperate mission to save your sister from some truly grotesque monsters. I mean, the game is full of action and has this really engaging narrative that doesn't always feel like a traditional horror game, but that's exactly why it works so well, because it feels like such a mixed bag of genres. The traces of horror and the sheer creepiness of the atmosphere almost catch you off guard more than they would in a standard title. It's that sharp contrast between the whimsical adventure elements and the sudden jarring darkness that makes the experience feel so unique. You might be focused on the platforming or the story 1 minute, and then suddenly you're staring down a terrifying creature that looks like it crawled straight out of a nightmare. If you're looking for a narrative-driven journey that's as beautiful as it is disturbing, this twisted Nordic world is absolutely worth your time. It's a creative masterpiece that proves you don't need constant scares to be effective, and believe me, when those heavy moments finally arrive, they hit incredibly hard. Next on the list, we have No Rest for the Wicked. I feel like it's the perfect time to talk about it now that the long-awaited co-op update has finally arrived. I mean, being able to tackle these brutal challenges with a friend completely changes the vibe, and that's one of the massive reasons why I had to include this game here today. You likely know the devs from their work on the Ori games, but they've clearly moved on from whimsical platforming to something much more focused on chopping up demons. You're essentially cast as an inquisitor, a holy warrior sent in to figure out what's behind this mysterious pestilence that's currently wrecking a sacred order. It might sound like a fairly basic story at first glance, but this top-down hack-and-slash adventure really shines once you get your hands on the combat. It's got everything you could possibly want, from precision parries to an array of insanely cool swords that make every encounter feel intense. What makes the action so compelling, is that the weapons you find aren't just stat sticks. They each have distinct movesets you have to learn. And it really is all about how you master the specific weight and reach of your gear if you want to survive the tougher encounters. You can also push your power even further by enhancing your weapons with different materials you scavenge, allowing for a bit of personal flair in how you fight. But don't expect a walk in the park, because this game plays like that classic hard school action where every mistake can be your last. You have to get your timing down perfectly to strike, parry, or dodge effectively, and honestly, there's no better feeling than finally mastering those mechanics. And once you've got the rhythm, you become this incredibly formidable, badass opponent that can tear through just about anything. It's that sense of growth and the constant itch to improve your skills that ultimately keeps you glued to the screen for hours on end. Now next up, since we already talked about sequels in this list, I think it's reasonable enough to highlight Lost in Random: The Eternal Die, which, is also such an exciting follow-up to that cult classic from a few years back. So if you love the Tim Burton-esque aesthetic of the first game, you're going to be obsessed with how they've cranked up the gothic atmosphere here. This time around, we're following Alexandra and her companion Fortune, and it's honestly refreshing to see the series lean so heavily into a faster action roguelite style of gameplay. The whole dice rolling mechanic is back, but it feels so much more fluid and intense when you're constantly dodging and weaving through these twisted neon-lit arenas. I mean, the way the game blends that tabletop randomness with real-time combat is just brilliant, especially since every run feels like a completely different gamble. It's got that same quirky, dark humor that made the original so special, but everything feels a bit more polished and high stakes this time, right? You're essentially fighting through these gauntlets in the Eternal Die, trying to break a cycle that feels both haunting and incredibly addictive. Even though it's technically an indie project, the visual design is just top tier, looking like a storybook that's come to life in the weirdest way possible. It's really the strategy involved in building your deck and choosing your power-ups that keeps the loop feeling fresh every single time you jump back in. It's one of those games that doesn't just rely on its looks, because the actual mechanics are deep enough to keep you hooked for hours on end. So if you're looking for something that breaks away from the standard AAA formula, this is honestly a perfect example of creative risks paying off. It really captures that sense of wonder and dread all at once, making it a standout entry for anyone who appreciates a bit of dark whimsy in their library. And finally, while we're still on the topic of incredible hand-drawn adventures, we definitely have to talk about Constance. This game is such a standout title for anyone who loves a bit of artistic flair in their action platformers. You're playing as a brush-wielding artist who's literally fighting through the inner workings of her own mind. And I mean, the way the game visualizes her creative struggles as these vibrant, decaying landscapes is just brilliant. The whole core mechanic revolves around using your paint to dash through enemies and transform into different forms, which honestly reminds me so much of Celeste in the way it demands that perfect frame-accurate precision. Now, the level design really leans into that one more try mentality, where you're constantly pushing through these intricate, brushstroke-laden gauntlets that feel both punishing and incredibly rewarding. It's got that same deep emotional core too, right? Because you're not just platforming for the sake of it, you're actually uncovering the narrative of a struggling creator. The way the mechanics evolve as you unlock new techniques keeps the loop feeling fresh, almost like you're learning to paint a masterpiece in real time. I mean, the boss fights are another level entirely, requiring you to master those dash refreshes just like you would during a climb up a snowy mountain, and even though it's a 2D adventure, the sense of scale in the backgrounds is just top tier, making the whole experience feel like a living, breathing sketchbook. So if you're a fan of tight controls and a story that actually has something to say about mental health and creativity, this is a total must play. It really proves that indie devs are still the ones taking the biggest, most beautiful risks in the genre these days. But yeah, those are just some incredible games that are just hiding in plain sight. Because, there are still lots of them out there, and if you have some, then be sure to recommend them in the comments below. If you like this video, click like, and also don't forget to subscribe to our channel to see more videos like this. But as always, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.